And I started work, and Mock can say the same, and Alcuin can say the same, Gwilym, Billy Bayer. We never knew about dust. It was a job of work. We went to work, glad to get a job. I never heard about dust. I thought I was going to be a collier or a man working down underground. We were told it wouldn't harm you. Coal dust wouldn't harm you. This is the man who used to tell us that coal dust was more good to you than doing you bloody harm.
In our little valley, they closed the colliery down, and the pitted bars is a supermarket. Empty journeys red with rust, road to rest amidst the dust. And the pitted bars, it's a supermarket now. 'Cause it's hard, it's hard. And it's harder than they will ever know.
How many have you got now, Mr. Neil?
Well, we've got 1, 2, 3 full ones under the bed.
Yes.
I've got a full one here and a full one there.
Yes.
That's 5, and I've got 4 full ones in the living room. That's 9, and you've
6.
got 6 there.
Yeah.
So that's 15, so I should be all right.
It takes more than 20 oxygen cylinders a week to keep Reg Neil breathing when he's home from hospital. For he's one of the 1,400 ex-coal miners in Britain completely disabled by pneumoconiosis. Mr. Neil first went underground as a boy of 14, but after 20 years, his career was cut short.
A year or so before I left the pit, I started to lose a lot of time. A fortnight and half a week. Now in a fortnight again, sort of business now till it got too bad. And they sent me for x-ray, and I was almost 12 months, 18 months. And I got a job in the forestry. And they were good to me on the forestry. They let me take my time, things like that. Till I could pick up on my own speed, like. I got well in with it then. And 20 years roughly. And all at once it got up with me again. I started to slow down. Lost and losing my energy, sort of a thing. I worked for 10 minutes to sit down for 5 at the start, and in the end I went down to the doctor. First time he said, run down probably, have a couple of weeks off. And a couple of weeks went into more weeks and months, and said for another x-ray and finish. The end of that. He said, you won't work no more. And he was right.
We've been married in years, 40 years. And out of that 40 years, we had 10 years before this illness caught up with my husband. So that, in truth, I can say we had 10 years of married life as it should be. The rest of the time has been, instead of being a husband, he's been my child more than my husband. Somebody to have to look after and do everything for. And while I don't mind doing this at all, not because it's my duty, but because I love my husband. And it hurts me that I have to do it for him. It's something that is dreadful to have to live with. My father died of it. I lost a brother 3 years ago at 58 years of age, a single man, and he died with it. Well, Mr. Neil came out to a 25 early stages. That's how it was classified. And he is now 100% totally disabled. And yet they say it's not a progressive complaint. Well, he's a good example of how progressive it is.
My clean cloth locker's empty now. I've thrown away the key. I've sold my boots and muffler and my lamp check 153. But I can't forget the times we had, the laughing midst the fear. 'Cause every time I cough I get a mining souvenir. 'Cause it's hard, do it's hard, and it's harder than they will ever know. And if they must take the blame, the price of coal's the same. The pitted baths, it's a supermarket now.
The Mabon Club is holding its annual party in South Wales. It's the most exclusive of clubs, but not exclusive enough. For throughout Britain there are 39,000 men officially holding the one qualification for membership: dust in their lungs. The average age of men attending the government pneumoconiosis panels has increased over the years, but every day of the year a man dies from the disease.
Mr. William John Griffith, please.
Every day of the year, a new name is added to the list of those certified. Any miner suspecting he may have dust on the lung is entitled to be examined by the panel doctors. If they find on his X-ray signs of dust, then he'll be graded according to its severity. And if his category is high enough, then he'll get some compensation, a weekly pension.
So we'd like to know now exactly what work you've done underground since 1966.
The same job.
Same job, and that was a borer.
That's it.
In what, hard ground, would you say? Is
Hard
it,
and
I see.
coal.
And coal, yes. Now tell me, do you smoke at all?
Yes, about 10 a day.
Can you walk on the level all right?
Not very well.
So you get a bit out of
Yes.
breath. So what about
Yes.
sleeping?
Don't sleep a great lot.
I see.
Wake up in the night coughing and can't go back to sleep.
Looking at that first film in 64 and the one in 66, I think there are only a minimal number of passages, don't you?
Oh,
I mean,
yes,
no,
there's not very
what
much
I
there at all.
call really category 1,
If that.
if that really. But and then the 69, there are, I think, possibly a few more. And we come to this last film in November, and the impression is here that we've got a few more opacities, more than the one. What do you think?
Oh, I think so, yes. It's just about it, isn't it?
No matter how common or widespread a disease, for the individual, its confirmation is always a moment of personal dismay.
And discuss the case most thoroughly, and I want to reassure you in the first place that the amount of dust you've got is very small, but it's of a sufficiency to justify making the diagnosis of pneumoconiosis of this very simple and minimal amount. And I'd like to impress upon you that it is of the simple type, and we are very...
The panel doctor is blandly reassuring. The disease is not usually disabling in its early days, and it may never get worse. But Mr. Griffiths comes from a community which has lived too long with dust for him not to know the dangers. In the valleys, every street has its roll call of casualties.
Well, we got a little club here, been open 22 years. And out of that, we got 62 members, and wherein half of them have been suffering with dust. Some got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 75, 100. There's a few here with 100%. And around here again, we got a lot of widows here whose husbands have died through dust. And Mrs. Lewis were there. There's Mr. Jones by here, there's Mr. Joseph over by here, all passed away. There's Mr. Parrish over by there, there's Mr. Walker up by there.
You say there are 40 widows around here alone. Those two streets down by that we include in our area. Well, there's another 33 widows in those two streets as well. All men have died from dust, yes. Yes, they have.
Yes.
Those are the ones.
And what a death some of them had. Terrible they were.
Well, he's better off where he is than to be in a corner suffering. When they can't get their breath, you want to try and breathe for them and you can't do it. He came home one night and he walked up the stairs and he said to me, he said, I'm no good to you and I'm no good to anybody else. Of course, natural, I broke down when I had a young boy. My father said to me, don't cry, he said. He'll come, he said, but he never did. He never did. 47. 47. That's all he was.
The mornings are worse, till about 12 o'clock. Hopeless, I can't breathe at all in the morning.
This last 5 years it has almost galloped on me, and they've gone worse and worse each winter. Oh, well, all the social life is gone. So I'm not able to enjoy my choral activities, operatic functions. I do attend concerts, and I'm able to take contributions. That's about all now in the male voice.
Does it make you feel bitter or sad?
Oh, it does make me feel better, as I've had to suffer this degrading, and it is degrading when I feel really ashamed when people see me in the street, like, and I've always been fit. I've been proud of my health, but now I've got to stop and look at all the prices in the window as an excuse to have a second wind.
And we were singing hymns and arias, land of my father. Now, stay on your own. Arhida knows. Fantastic. You know, it's like Treorchy male voice up the back there. Like Treorchy Cop in the front. But not to worry.
Surprisingly, the Mabon Club is the first to be formed exclusively for the benefit of the breathless miners of the valleys. But 1975, it said, marks a significant step forward in the way we treat men with pneumoconiosis. The government, the coal board and the union have, between them, worked out added compensation. A complicated scale correlating age, lung damage and disability can give men lump sums of up to £10,000 each. So it's bonanza time then for members of the Mabon Club and thousands of their fellow miners throughout the country.
And we were singing hymns and arias, land of my father. Come on, let's go, you're off. Arhida knows.
In South Wales, the NUM Compensation Secretary is Di Coity Davis.
We have come to an agreement with the government and with the coal board that compensation in the form of damages shall be paid to men who are certified with pneumoconiosis. But again, it would be quite wrong for anyone to assume that this meets the justice of our case. It does not. There are many men who were certified under the Old Workmen's Compensation Act, who commuted their claims, who are blackmailed into commuting their claims, who are still suffering from pneumoconiosis, who won't get a penny at all. Now, I've heard this word bonanza being flashed around. Well, what kind of a bonanza is it? At the present moment, no one has had anything. There's been no payments at all. But when they are being paid, and they will be paid in 1975, the most a man can have, the very most he can have, and he has to be very seriously disabled to get it, and at to be a very young age when being certified, is £10,000. Now, is this such a bonanza? Is this such a bonanza? Because you'll appreciate that again I have to say it's an incurable disease. The man is going to have to carry this burden throughout his life. It has already crippled him as far as wages are concerned. And when you consider these factors, I think you will agree with me that it's not the bonanza that some people are making it out to be.
The miners' union has fought for decades on compensation and is likely to go on doing so despite the recent cash settlement. The revived economic importance of the coal industry has greatly strengthened the union's hand, but many medical and social problems remain. Problems that illustrate graphically the slow and often grudging way we've reacted to the consequences and casualties of industrial progress. Over the last 30 years, one Welsh miner in 5 has developed pneumoconiosis, more than twice the British average. Their names are as evocative of Welsh mining as the disease which unites them. Their case histories have become the stuff of statistics. But in the world of statistics, there are no individuals. For each Mr. Jones, the figures are irrelevant. And behind every case history of pneumoconiosis, there lies the essential evidence of an X-ray film. A man's disability is his breathlessness, but that's no guide to the amount of coal dust on his lungs. Pneumoconiosis has therefore become a radiological condition.
Now take a deep breath in, hold it tight, don't breathe or move, keep still.
If there are not enough white dust spots on the film, there can be no pneumoconiosis, say the doctors. The man's breathlessness must have another cause. In life, the evidence of the film is absolute. It can only be challenged or confirmed after death. In South Wales, it's the standard practice to examine, post-mortem, the lungs of all men known to have worked underground. Because of this research, pathologists in Cardiff are now suggesting that pneumoconiosis is not the only disabling disease caused by coal dust. Bronchitis and certain forms of emphysema in miners, they say, may have closer links with coal dust than medical opinion has long believed. If confirmed, their findings may one day affect medicine's understanding of a whole range of dust diseases in miners. But in the case of pneumoconiosis itself, the award of benefit to widows still depends completely on the result of an autopsy. Miners are bitter that certification in life is not enough to ensure a widow's pension. But 50 years ago, it was the miners themselves who first campaigned for the pathologist's knife to reveal to a skeptical world the ravages of coal dust on the human lung.
I remember back in 1926, my father dying from pneumoconiosis, miner's asthma, as they call it around here. And I remember the colliery doctor coming to the house, speaking to my mother, and asking that he should perform a post-mortem operation. Well, now, my mother didn't know what a post-mortem operation was. And she asked me about it and come in to speak to the doctor. And we had a word together, and the doctor explained that they were trying to establish that miners suffering like my father were suffering because they had worked in the collieries and were suffering from dust. And that they were trying to establish a case for the payment of workmen's compensation. And the post-mortem was performed in the front room of this little cottage where I used to live. And you can imagine the feeling of my mother, who was in the kitchen whilst the pathologist was performing the post-mortem. And of course, as we all knew around here, my father died from the disease, and his lungs was full of silica rock.
And where are we today in 1974? The difference is this. If we can persuade the widow, who sometimes has religious objections as well as others, sometimes she feels some emotional stress about having a husband cut up, but if we can persuade the widow to have a post-mortem, we're then in the lap of the gods as to whether she's going to get anything out of it. Because if the pneumoconiosis panel says that the pneumoconiosis was not a factor in death, then she's back at square one. She's where she was before. Now, we consider in the union that if a man has carried this burden, there should be no necessity of a post-mortem. It should be accepted on grounds of logic. They know the effects of pneumoconiosis, how crippling it is. We think as a union that when a man has been certified by the pneumoconiosis panel in lifetime, that this should be accepted, and the widow spared this ritual of going through a post-mortem and what have you. And this is what one of the reforms we would like to see. But even so, even when we get through this, even when we are able to get a favourable decision from the panel, what the hell does it mean to the widow? Less than £1 a week. Less than £1 a week.
Every ton of coal has carried with it the miners' resentment against the public's past apathy to the dust disease. Change has been slow, but substantial improvement began with the establishment in 1945 in South Wales of the Pneumoconiosis Research Unit. Its first director in that critical time was Charles Fletcher.
Well, there certainly have been a lot of changes since I first came down here in 1945. And of course, a lot of the mines have been closed that were open then. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is that there aren't these groups of men standing at the corners because they couldn't work in the mines. Not as it was in the 1930s because there wasn't any work in the mines, but because they'd been found to have the dust disease and they weren't allowed to work in the mines. They were prevented from working. They weren't all that breathless or disabled at that time. They just had the dust. And there they were at the corners of the streets over there, in the middle of the towns, everywhere around. There were these men. 5,000 of them had had to leave their work in the South Wales coal mines in the 1 year of 1945. And they were bitter and perplexed. What was it all about? Because, you see, dust at one time had been thought to be good for lungs. In fact, at one time in the Brompton Hospital, they used to treat people with tuberculosis by giving them coal dust to inhale. So what was wrong with the dust, and why were they getting this, and what could they do? If you'd gone into the houses here, you'd have found, in every 5 or 6 houses, you'd have found a man sitting too breathless to move from his fireside. And the men standing in the streets had that to look forward to. There was nothing for them to do but to look at the future with despair.
I can remember them on winter mornings sitting, like discarded leaves in a refuge of shadows. Their ragged clothes sprinkled with grey dust. Their faces immobile, bony, with steel eyes gazing nowhere. Their mouths stealing air and twisted with gestures that only the mine's dust can fashion. Rock borers from Stars district. A title sufficient to grade their lives. A place where silica sandwiched coal and dominated by the pillars of darkness and vague promises of death. They were grouped according to their affliction, gobbing between bent knees and answering the winter's lash with a fistful of coughs.
So the 1940s were a pretty bad time in South Wales, and what was to be done about it? First of all, what about the time at which men were being taken out of the mines because of the disease? Was this too early or too late? Then what about the amount of dust in the mines? Were the South Wales mines much dustier than the other mines, and that's why there was so much more disease there? Or was the South Wales dust more dangerous? We had to look at the amount of dust in the mines compared with the amount of disease it was causing. And for this, we had to make accurate measurements of dust by new methods, and we had to have very accurate measurements of the amount of disease by new techniques of X-raying and diagnosing in the X-ray. And then we had to test how the dust was affecting the lungs by new physiological tests to measure the function of the lungs and see the earliest possible changes. And we needed to develop these new techniques. And then, of course, there was the treatment. A lot of these men who were being taken out of the mines were young men in their 30s. What could we do to prolong their lives and to get them back to work? Well, we were given a whole ward in a hospital in Cardiff, and by taking these men into the ward, we discovered that for many of them, they weren't really badly disabled, but they were more frightened and disabled by fear than anything else. And by simple rehabilitation and exercise, we could bring them back to a reasonable state of health for further work. But as a basis for all this work, we needed these accurate X-ray techniques. and new methods of classifying the X-rays, which have now become, in fact, standard throughout the whole world.
Today it's standard practice to X-ray every miner every 2 years, and the pneumoconiosis research unit's understanding of the disease has become much more sophisticated. Its director now is Dr. John Gilson.
I think Dr. Fletcher gave you a good idea of what we knew in 1945. Perhaps the most important thing that we've learnt since that time is that pneumoconiosis doesn't consist of just one disease, but consists of two diseases which have important differences.
What are those differences?
Simple pneumoconiosis is the form of the disease which is the commoner one. It is the one which is not associated with disability. It's not associated with a loss of life expectancy, but it is related to the amount of dust in the lung and also to the dust exposure of the miner.
And the second one?
The second is known as complicated pneumoconiosis, and this is the form of the disease which is progressive. In some people it tends to get worse, but not necessarily very rapidly. It does lead to some shortening of life, and it is a cause in itself of breathlessness and disability. These two forms of pneumoconiosis have to be separated because although they're related one to the other, only one of them is an important form of the disease from the point of view of breathlessness.
Is there, though, a progression from simple pneumoconiosis, which you say isn't disabling, to complicated pneumoconiosis?
Well, here is one of the very interesting things which was discovered, and that is that this form of the disease, simple pneumoconiosis, only gets worse, you get more spots on the films if you are exposed to more dust. This form of the disease, complicated pneumoconiosis, only arises if you already have a certain amount of dust in your lungs. This, therefore, enables you to use the information about simple pneumoconiosis to prevent people getting complicated pneumoconiosis, because if you remove people who are developing category 2, say, simple pneumoconiosis from further dust exposure, you'll be able to prevent the serious forms of these complicated pneumoconiosis ever occurring.
But there are still 1,400 ex-miners with lungs like these. Most of them, as young men, worked either in pits which no longer exist or where the style of mining has now changed out of all recognition. Before nationalisation, no attempt was made to control the dust. Ignorance and the pressure of economics conspired to create in the old mines an environment that was lethally polluted. Pick and shovel and pony raised enough dust. When the machines eventually came, they produced even more. But unlike men and animals, machines can be engineered to control the dust that they themselves create. The Coal Board's research engineers, working with private industry, have built dust suppression into the massive coal-cutting machinery. And the level of dust has fallen dramatically. But the NUM remains openly sceptical of the board's achievements.
The Coal Board has done a lot to get rid of pneumoconiosis in the prevention field, but it'd be quite wrong to say that the union is satisfied with the steps taken by the Coal Board. You must remember that the coal industry has passed through a period of competition with oil when economics, when production was paramount, and to get this production, I am quite convinced that there's been a subjection of safety matters, including dust suppression, to the benefit of production.
Well, we must look at this in perspective. If we go back 40 years ago, when I started in the pits as a boy, we didn't have any dust control whatsoever. You couldn't see the man working next to you. Since then, dust control has evolved. The board has spent a lot of money putting pipes down the pit to take water to every point. As a matter of fact, at the moment, the present time, the mean dust count for the 109 faces in our area is 4.4 milligrams a cubic meter. The standard being set is 8. So we are nearly 50% below the standard which they will require in the future.
Men are being certified with pneumoconiosis today and every day. So if the dust prevention methods that the Coal Board are following were 100%, then of course there wouldn't be these certifications.
This is a history of the past. As I was saying, 40 years ago we had no dust control. And the highest incidence of pneumoconiosis is in men between 50 and 65 years of age. I would like to be alive in 30 or 40 years' time to see the results of the work we are doing now. If you went underground in this pit, which is not a new pit, you'd see all the latest innovations in dust control.
Most dust is created where machines cut the compressed strata of rock and coal. The struggle to keep it out of the airstream must begin with the first bite of metal into the face. It can't end until the coal has left the pit. It's plain water, scientifically applied, which has laid the dust in British mines. Most pits, the Coal Board says, now regularly meet the legal dust standards, although individuals doing particular jobs may still be breathing polluted air. Every movement in the miles of workings underground can raise problems. But most of the difficulties can now be solved by the investment of time and labour. The Coal Board's own engineers, however, are well aware that new mining techniques constantly raise new dust hazards. For instance, in some South Wales pits, the self-advancing chocks provide safety from falling rock. But when the roof is made of coal, the load-bearing metal grinds it into dust, which can fall uncontrolled into the airstream. But it would take more than this to force most Welsh miners to wear their protective masks. They believe that to put them on would weaken the Coal Board's vigilance.
I'd like to see all dust eradicated, but how can we do that in a mining industry where we are continually making dust? Whatever we do underground, it makes dust. It's everyone's problem. And this problem is to ensure that management and men use the measures that are put in for dust control. Those people who've lived in the valleys, like I have all my life, we've lived with pneumoconiosis all our life, and we don't want to see it. I'm not going to say that we're going to cut it out altogether. This is for medical people to say. I can't say this. But I do know that no man in the pit wants pneumoconiosis. And if they think it's too dusty, they walk out.
But the value of scientific standards can be assessed only by their relationship to the health of individual men. And since 1954, this has been the job of the Coal Board's own research institute. The breathing capacity and X-rays of thousands of miners are studied in the light of their known exposure to dust underground. This is the most comprehensive research project of its kind, and it's now beginning to provide unexpected information about the long-term effects of dust on the lung. This research looks at the health of individual miners and is now beginning to challenge long-cherished medical beliefs which were based on the statistical study of mining communities. And from the study of records held at the Research Institute's headquarters in Edinburgh, the early dust measurements of the Coal Board itself have proved to be misleading. The Deputy Director of the Institute is Henry Walton.
Well, dust sampling started many years ago, before World War I. It was done first in the gold mines of South Africa. But it was found that the amount of pneumoconiosis did not agree entirely with the dust measurements. This was because it was measuring mainly the coarse dust. You should understand that dust is much more difficult to measure, is much more complex than a gas. It's a mixture of coarse particles of different sizes and shapes and fine particles, and these have different effects on the lungs. And when work started in Britain, just before the Second World War, new instruments designed to sample for counting were used. This was the one that was used in a study among South Wales coal miners, and it remained the standard sampling instrument in Britain for about 30 years. There were some anomalies. It was found that even this new counting method did not give complete agreement between the dust counts and the amount of disease. For example, in South Wales anthracite mines, where the dust is flaky and coarse, there appeared to be much more disease for fewer particles than was the case in, for example, Scotland, where the particles caught on the slide were more compact and numerous.
For something like 30 years then, you were still getting it wrong.
Well, we were getting it much better than before, but it was still not completely right, and I'll tell you why. The behavior of dust in the lungs depends on more than just its size or just its weight. Here we have two particles of equal weight, one a flaky one, the other a compact one. See how differently they behave. The compact particle falls much more quickly than the flaky one. The same thing happens in dusty air that is breathed. Only particles that fall out very slowly and are too small to be seen are carried deeply into the lungs to cause pneumoconiosis. Hence, dust that contains many flaky particles is particularly dangerous. So that the method of counting them by size did not give a correct discrimination between this type of particle.
So what did you do?
What we needed was an instrument that simulated the sorting mechanism of the lungs. This is an aerodynamic sorting, and it depends on the falling out of particles, not on how big they are. So we produced a new instrument, and research to do this had been going on for some years, so that we have at the end a dust sample corresponding to the dust that goes into the depths of the lungs. For our research purposes, the instruments are taken down by volunteer miners that we are also studying medically, and are kept as near to the miner as possible throughout his full shift of work, so that we have a measure of the total dose he has received in the whole time he is in the mine.
Changing dust standards and the decline of the industry have put practical difficulties in the way of the medical research. But it's now providing some of the answers to questions which have long been matters of dispute between the experts and the union, which has argued that even from its earliest stages, pneumoconiosis is disabling. The director of the institute is Dr. David Muir.
To take the most argumentative question at the moment, does simple pneumoconiosis cause disability in a miner? Now, our answer is unequivocally yes, it does. We don't necessarily believe that the small round lesions seen on his X-ray themselves necessarily cause an abnormality of lung function, but what we do think is that these X-ray signs are evidence that the man has been exposed to excessive dust. Now, it's the excessive dust exposure which we believe damages a man's lungs. There's no doubt at all that simple pneumoconiosis causes less disability than people thought perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. And I think one of the problems is that, on average, the disability is not very significant. But taking individual miners, and don't forget that averages represent a range of extremes from people who may have not been affected by dust to people who may have had a severe disability. It is correct that on average, simple pneumoconiosis does not cause a great deal of disability. But I have no doubt at all that in men within this group who have been exposed to excessive dust, that some of these men have been disabled. And our problem is to pick these out. If their X-ray is abnormal, then I think the onus of proof must be on those who think he should not be compensated or who think he is not disabled to prove that this is so. For our part, we think that he is likely to have got his disability due to his exposure and to mining.
But everyone, miner or not, is susceptible to chest diseases. So coal dust hasn't generally been blamed by doctors for illnesses like bronchitis and emphysema when they occur in working miners. The breathlessness can be just as bad, But of course, there are no telltale white spots on the X-rays. Harold Powell is convinced he's got dust, but the evidence says not.
Well, they say emphysema and bronchitis. But I think myself, has that been brought about from working in the mines and in the dust? But they say no, of course. And as it is, I can't claim anything for it. And when I finished work 8 years ago, I had the £40 pension, which should have been the 200, reduced to 40 because I was 53. And I had a letter with it saying that my house call would be stopped until I reached the age of 60.
What do you get then, by way of money?
Social Security, £16.50, plus the £3 pension from the coal board. That's all.
If you had pneumoconiosis, would you get more than that?
Oh yes, a lot more. Some men, like myself, no different than me, they get it. I'm exactly the same as them, but they say mine's emphysema and get nothing.
The research worker can give you the facts, but I don't think it's our job to decide who should be compensated and who should not.
But you can say whether a disease is associated with an industry or not.
We certainly can. Within our research group, whom we've been measuring the environment, we believe that excessive dust exposure does cause bronchitis, and I personally think it's likely it causes emphysema as well. Although, as I think I told you, we cannot give a clear answer for some time. Within our own population, we can measure the dust. And within the research project, there is no doubt that we can identify bronchitis, that is cough with sputum, as being more common in miners who have had excessive dust exposure.
And yours is a large research project, so it would be quite likely to apply throughout the coalfields, would it?
Yes, I think this is probably so. All the time, we have to remember that the community, of which miners are an important section of, smoke cigarettes. And I think that this is as likely to be the cause of bronchitis as the underground environment.
Now, we believe that the conditions pertaining to the underground are most conducive to the contraction of this disease. And indeed, statistics will show that the incidence of bronchitis among miners is far higher than other sections of society. And we believe that these men who are crippled by bronchitis, after working many years in the pit, should be beneficiaries under this scheme, the same as those who are officially certified as suffering from pneumoconiosis.
Well, I think that it's no good trying to compensate or reward people or give them benefit on a different scale, whether they're disabled in industry or not from industry. Whether it's cigarette smoking or dust seems to me to be irrelevant. The suffering is just the same, and the benefit that's given to sick people should be because of the amount of suffering and disablement they have. And I think it's been a disaster that we agreed that people whose disablement can be attributed to their work should have a higher rate of benefit than those whom we can't. Take the simple example of a bus driver who runs into a private motorist. They're both injured to exactly the same extent. The bus driver gets a higher rate than the private motorist. Well, it's nonsense.
Let me make this perfectly clear. The National Union of Mine Workers is for a socialist system. If a man is disabled or a woman is disabled, we believe they should be properly compensated for it, irrespective of whether they contracted their causes of disablement in the mines or in work or elsewhere. We would like to see a social system where all people, the unfortunates of society, are properly cared for, financially and otherwise. But I think you have to remember that as far as the mines are concerned, that pneumoconiosis is only caused in the pits. It has a peculiarity as far as the pits are concerned. Coal is the lifeblood of this country. It can't be charmed out of the ground. You have to have men to go down and dig it. Now, those men who are prepared, who have the blood and guts to go down and dig it for you, must, of course, have the security, the knowledge of security when and if they contract this disease of pneumoconiosis.
And so the arguments about compensation drag on, even after decades of intensive investigation. In this matter, as in others, the miners believe they're a special case. And the Coal Board's own research suggests that health risks underground may be much greater than has so far been admitted. But that's only part of the problem. While clinical care of the higher standards is available, although by no means everywhere, social assistance seems to lag behind. It's surprising how little help is available to these men once they are disabled. And as for a cure for pneumoconiosis, that's long been discounted. One of the doctors at the pneumoconiosis research unit is Alan Axford.
Well, one might think that after 30 years of research into this field, that a cure were possible. But this is unlikely when one considers the destructive changes to the lung. There you have an irreversible lesion which has actually destroyed lung tissue, and the prospect of a cure really isn't on. But fortunately, the lung, like many other organs, has remarkable reserves, and it is possible to survive when the working lung volume is appreciably reduced. There has been a tendency to attribute the disablement that goes with pneumoconiosis as entirely due to pneumoconiosis and not treatable. And this has resulted in a lot of patients being given ill advice and taking to their armchairs when in fact some treatment might have been available, for example, to relieve the airways obstruction that may sometimes coincide with the disease. I'm sure there are many cases who, if they had been taken at an early stage of their disablement, had they been given both medical and psychological support, that many of them would have been capable of doing very much more than they have in fact done. I see cases in the outpatient department where all morale has been lost. Their need to continue in life is gone, and I find that I'm asked to admit patients to the ward simply to relieve the stresses and strains within the family and simply to provide the patient with contact with the outside world. And this is really what's led us to form our Mavins Club, to deal with this social deprivation that comes with disablement.
Much has been done to overcome the dangers of coal dust, but even after 30 years of research, there are still elements of complacency, doubts about the way the challenge has been met. There are large gaps in medical knowledge and in public concern. No one understands for certain why one miner remains healthy while the man working alongside him becomes totally disabled by dust. And the man who does get the disease is too quickly written off by society to eke out a shadow of life by his fireside. The man who is breathless is imprisoned, and so is his family. At present, few of them get the social support that could open out a different kind of life. And even today's miners may eventually have to sit and wait for the decision of the pneumoconiosis panels. That at least is their fear, despite the optimism of some of the doctors.
I think we've got it beaten. There's no reason why any man in British coal mines now should get disabled by dust, by pneumoconiosis. Because, first of all, the dust levels are so well controlled by the magnificent job the coal board's done that almost no man is reaching the critical stage at which he has a risk of getting complicated pneumoconiosis until he gets to about age 50. Well, at that age, he's hardly got time to be disabled before his life is over. And if there are a very few men, and there are, who are getting signs of dust retention in their lungs at an earlier age, well, they can be moved to less dusty working places, or the places where they're getting this, where the dust control is not adequate, can be closed down. And so I think that there's no reason at all why we haven't got it beaten now. The problem now is the question of bronchitis and emphysema.
Every day men are still being certified with this disease. I only wish to God they were right, that pneumoconiosis had been beaten. Unfortunately, that simply isn't true. Mining is mining, but I want to see that where men are still certified and suffering from pneumoconiosis, that they be treated properly, humanely, different to what many are being treated now.
You don't want a yellow tablet, thank you?
Oh, not for a minute, anyway.
You sure you're all right then?
Yes, I'm all right.
All right.